The Panos Skordi Encounter.
Welcome to part 2 on tackling challenges surrounding the P exam. Welcome back, David.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Let's look at how to prepare for the P exam. Does it involve a lot of calculus?
So I don't want to oversell the amount of calculus. I'd say it is the most calculus heavy actuarial exam. And so certainly you need to be comfortable with taking derivatives and integrals of polynomials and exponentials. It's also relatively unique among the actuarial exams that you have to do some double integrals and some partial derivatives. Having said that, you don't need like a full third semester of calculus doing everything that one does in the multivariate calculus course. You need roughly 2 weeks of that multivariate calculus. So if you haven't had that sort of calculus background, there are a variety of choices you have. In my seminar, I do a calculus review, and I cover the additional calculus topics that you need to know that you might not have seen. If you're trying to use a traditional hard copy study manual or just a textbook, you could use Khan Academy or something like that for the little bit of multivariate calculus that you need to have.
What skills does a student need to pass exam P, other than the calculus?
So it's the actuarial exams, I think, are a sort of deeper level of thinking on math than what a lot of people are used to. So instead of being one-step problems, the problems are more 3 or 4 steps. And so that's partly why passing, you only have to get 70% right, which for a lot of people is a big psychological adjustment. A lot of people are used to getting 90% of math questions right. And now you're looking at getting a much lower number of questions right. So part of it is just doing a number of problems and learning how to break down a problem into multiple steps, doing what some people call following your nose. You see the question, you do the first logical step, even if you're not sure it's going to get you the right answer, but maybe it gets you far enough that you can see how to get from that step to the final answer. Or you could work backwards from the final answer, take a step backwards and see, what do you need to look for? So yeah, I think a lot of what people struggle with and takes time to build up is that problem solving ability.
Would you say it's best to have a regular routine in terms of study times during the week?
Absolutely. I think studying a little bit every day or every other day is much more effective than studying for 6 hours in one single block 1 day a week. So, I think that my understanding is there's a lot of pedagogical data supporting this. If you spend half an hour to an hour each day or every other day, it's going to be much more effective than just trying to do one single massive block one time a week.
So other than the week, if we look at a student's entire study plan, should they plan from day one all the way through to the day they sit their exam as to what they're going to do?
A lot of people do that. Part of this, I think, depends on your personality style. I think I mentioned in our previous episode, I'm something of a procrastinator. I'm bad at making plans. So when I took actual exams, I didn't have that detailed of a plan. But what I do think is useful is to think about, right, here's the day I'm taking the exam. I want to spend this amount of time taking practice exams. So I want to be done going through the material by such and such a date. And so that's how many days I have available to go through the material. And so some people might find it helpful to just go through and break that down for you. Actually, if you're using the seminar that I teach, our system actually automatically does that for you. One of the things that we ask you when you start up an account is to select what is your exam date and what date do you want to start doing the practice exams. And then the computer system will generate a suggested schedule for you. And even say, hey, you're a little bit behind schedule. You should, do a little extra studying this week to try to catch up a little bit.
Overall, to pass subject P, how much time do you think a typical student needs to put in? How many hours do they need to put in?
That's a really good question. And I think that depends again on the student background. I think I mentioned last week that there's a fair bit of calculus on P. And so people who are current math majors who tend to be better at calculus and more used to doing problem solving take substantially less time than someone who's a career changer who hasn't done math in 10 years. So for people who are current math majors, in surveys that we've done, 120 to 150 hours seems very common for both learning the material and doing practice problems. For people who are career changers who haven't done it for a long, long time, you'll see much longer study times. And I've seen people talking about doing 300 hours of study time. So, I think it really varies to a certain extent based on what your background is like.
So if a student is going to take, say, 300 hours to study for the exam and get prepared for the exams, what would you say the split would be between studying the material and working on questions, trying to figure out how to answer questions?
So I would say, let me sort of side answer that question. So the people who are sort of the current students who are doing it in a smaller number of hours are probably doing that over a shorter time period as well. They're probably doing over maybe 2 months. The person who's doing the 300 hours is probably doing it over more like 4 to 6 months. And, but yes, always I think the bulk of your time is spent working on problems. Yeah, math is a very active learning subject. You don't learn math just by sitting down and watching somebody do a video. Like within my videos, I'll often tell students to pause the video and work on the problem that we just mentioned, and then resume the video once they figured they've gotten their hands on it. Like you really want to be actively working and doing lots of problems and then reviewing those problems. I think that's a step that people leave out a lot. It's not enough to just do the problem. If you do the problem and you get it right, but it took you 10 minutes, well, on average, you have 6 minutes per problem on the exam. So if you spent 10 minutes on a problem and got right, that's great. But it means there might have been a better approach that you could have done. Or if you spent 10, 15 minutes on a problem and you don't know how to do it, well, then, it's good to look at a solution and try to learn from your mistakes and maybe come back to that problem the next day and try it again.
Do you have any other tips on how to successfully navigate exam P?
Well, I think it's useful for students to try to identify what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. I've seen people online talking about doing 2 practice exams a day for 2 weeks. So 28 practice exams in the 2 weeks right before the exam. And then they're surprised that they failed the exam. That I think is not an effective strategy because you're spending 6 hours writing the questions. You're not reviewing the problems, which I had mentioned before, but you're also doing a lot of time spent working on problems that you already know how to do. There's some topics that are going to be easier for you than other topics. And this will vary slightly from person to person, but for example, most people find your basic draw a Venn diagram, come up with an answer problem to be relatively easy. You don't want to spend 60 hours working problems like that. You'd rather spend some time getting that, saying, okay, I have this down cold. And what are some other things I don't know as well? And so if you can say, okay, I don't understand how to do continuity corrections on normal approximations. If I spend 2 hours just drilling problems on that one subtopic, doing several problems back in a row, you'll actually figure out what are the important things. All right? So for example, if you're flipping a coin 100 times, if you want the probability of at least 45 heads, that's different than the probability of having more than 45 heads. One of those includes 45, one of them doesn't. So you do the continuity correction slightly differently in one situation versus the other. If you do those 2 problems back to back, you will learn that idea. If you're doing only practice exams and you're doing one continuity problem a day, because that's how often they come up on your practice exams, then you're not seeing those side-by-side comparisons. And it's going to take more repetitions to master that one idea.
Well, that's great information. Thanks, David. David's contact details will be included in the description. This is your host, Panos Skordi, on the Panos Skordi Encounter. Take care wherever you are.